The housing market, is it about to crash? Well, when it comes to home price values, demographics are destiny because demographics control the demand for housing units. And we can see this if we break down the demographics, going back to the baby boomers, going through Gen X, then millennials, and forecasting into Gen Z, we can see that there is an incredible amount of future demand coming our way over the next 10 years. In fact, this chart breaks down an analysis showing that there's 21.4 million buyers. That means demand for housing, 21.4 million in demand over the next decade. That's a demand of about 2.1 million new homes per year will be needed to satiate the demand of those millennials and Gen Z. So let's walk through this slide really quickly. What this shows you is the baby boomer generation. Their current age is between 60 and 78 years old. So if you live in the United States and you're between 60 and 78, you're a boomer. We have 71 million in this cohort. So this is a very large demographic group. And the current home ownership rate for baby boomers is 74%. So the vast majority of them own homes. Now, this is what's very interesting. Their home ownership rate by the age of 30 was 48%. And their home ownership rate by the age of 40 was 65%. So we can see as boomers got older, more and more and more of them bought homes. Today it's 74%. When they were 30, it was 48%. All right, let's go on to Gen X. Gen X, you're a Gen Xer if you're 44 to 59. There's 65 million in this population cohort. So this was a big drop off in demographics. The home ownership rate currently is 65%. And by the age of 30, only 42% were owners. So we can see that by the age of 30, the percentage of owners is dropping. And by the age of 40, same thing, you'll see that there's more homeowners at 40 than there was 30, but less home ownership participation rate than in the boomers. And that trend continues with the millennials. You're a millennial if you're 28 to 43. There's 73 million millennials. So the cohort of millennials, AKA potential buyers, is actually larger than the boomer generation, making up for this drop in population during Gen X. Now, the current home ownership rate, it's only 45%. Only 45%. Look at the home ownership rate of Gen X, 65%. The home ownership rate of boomers, 74%. When they were by the age of 30, 33% of millennials own homes. And by the age of 40, 55%. So less than Gen X, less than boomers, but you can still see as millennials move through their age from the age of 30 to the age of 40, their home ownership rate increases drastically. And look at the ages of these millennials. The millennials are 28 to 43. By age 40, 55% own a home. So that tells us a huge percentage of millennials are transitioning between renters and buyers, because at 30, they only 33% own homes. At 40, 55% own homes. So as this huge cohort gets older, moves from the age of 30 towards 40, we can see that a large percentage of them turn into home owners. And again, currently today, only 45% own homes. So that tells us that there's future demand. And then let's go on to Gen Z. Gen Z is between 12 and 27 years old. There's 69 million. So still a very large cohort, almost the same size as the boomers. They have an 8% home ownership rate. Of course, that's because they're a young generation, right? The oldest Gen Z is only 27. But as they move towards 30, if they follow in the paths of the millennials, we could see a huge pickup of demand for housing units from Gen Z. So check this out. In the next 10 years, it is estimated that as Gen Z moves from an 8% home ownership rate to a 33% home ownership rate, that's 17 million new homes that they will want to buy over that next decade period. That's demand, 17 million additional demand for housing units. Millennials, 17% still live at home. And by the age 40, we can estimate an extra 4.4 million will enter the housing market. Sum this all up, and it means that between Gen Z and millennials alone, there's 21.4 million homes needed to satiate that demand. But here's the important thing to consider. This does not include any sort of migration. So we have people from all over the world that come to America each year, and a percentage of those will want to buy homes. This does not even include any of that demand. So the demand, here's the takeaway, the demand for housing over the next 10 years is estimated to be 21.4 million, or about 2.14 million per year. That's important. Now let's talk a little bit about supply. If we look back in supply over the previous 10 years, from 2013 to 2023, the light blue line here is the completion of residential homes. And there were only 14 million new homes built over that 10-year period of time. So 14 million new homes built over the last 10 years, 21 million home demand from millennials and Gen Z. So you tell me what happens to home prices when 21 million people are fighting over 14 million homes. There's more demand than there is supply. Now, this is only a 10-year look back. So let's look back a little farther, just to be fair. Let's look back all the way to the 60s. And this is housing completions going back to the 60s. And these are in thousands, right? So if it says 1,600, that's 1,600,000, also known as 1.6 million. And we can kind of draw a trend line here, right? Sometimes housing completions get, all the way up to 2 million. Sometimes they drop down to 1 million. But if we just draw a trend line, I think it would be fair to say, going back to the 60s, the number of housing unit completions has been about 1.6 million. Let's just call this the trend line. Well, of course, then there's the Great Recession. The number of housing completions drops off precipitously. And then we know over the last 10 years, we've only built about 14 million. So that trend line dropped because of this pullback. But let's just say housing completions average 1.6 million going back to the 60s. That's probably a fair assumption. But remember, we need 2.1 million new homes just to satiate the demand of millennials and Gen Z. So if we've only averaged 1.6 million homes going back all the way back to the 60s, so that would be over the preceding 60 plus years, how are we going to fill that gap? What are the ramifications of 2.1 million new buyers and only 1.6 housing supply coming online? And here's what we see as a result. We see a very low level of existing homes on the market today compared to historical norms. If we go all the way back to 2003, so over 20 years, we'll see that, the number of homes for sale on the market ranged between about 2 million and 4 million. In fact, at the time of the Great Recession, we were right about 4 million homes on the market, and that caused an oversupply of homes, and we saw a drop in prices. But look at today. Today, there are 75% less homes on the market, and that means there is less supply. So not only is there less supply today, but the demand is growing as millennials and Gen Z enter the housing market, while we simply don't have home builders building enough homes. That is a supply-demand imbalance. And when demand exceeds supply, you're going to have upward pressure on prices. Now, we wrote a whole article on this, which we'll link to in the description. If you found this valuable, please follow our channel for more insightful information like this.